There are a lot of ways to build arched trellises out of cattle panel. We needed one that could handle Florida storms, the weight of the vegetation that we're planning on growing, but that was also freestanding and fairly attractive. We'll show you how we built this one, what's involved in it, and if you stick around right to the end, we'll show you how to use the clips that come with the T-posts to make the most secure connection that we know of. So we want to put an arched trellis right here. You'll see that we've already marked it out with boards, shows roughly where we want it to go, but we're not entirely sure exactly how wide to put it, so we don't want to put in any stakes to guide it or anything like that. We kind of want to put the panel in place and then either move it narrower or wider and see how it looks. So we're going to show you how we do that. If you've ever tried to wrangle one of these cattle panels, they're pretty heavy, and if you're going to bend them, they can always snap back. So having a way to do that by yourself is great, but if you happen to have a helper, that makes it a lot easier. The cattle panels are metal, so even though they're not sharp, you still probably want to use gloves just so that you save your hands. So I just want to show you really quick what we're working with here. We have standard T-posts. The T-posts that we get from Tractor Supply seem to be a little heavier duty than the ones that we get from the big box stores. They may be a little bit more expensive, but they seem to have better sizes available, and they usually always have them in stock. Also have some ratchet straps. The ratchet straps we're going to use to kind of control the panel as we're changing its size and figuring out how wide we want the arch to be. We also have the clips that are used. We'll talk more about those at the end of the video. We're going to use those to attach parts of the cattle panel to the T-posts. You would think that clips are something that are really easy to use, but they don't give you any instructions, and it's not intuitive if you don't know how they work. So we'll show you that at the end. And then a tape measure if you want to measure how far apart they are and make sure that your ends are even. And then gloves, always a good idea when dealing with anything metal. Let's go get our cattle panel. So Daisy's holding up the cattle panel for us. The first thing that you have to decide is how you want the bars oriented. If you will look on one side, the bars run in one direction and they're on the outside. The other side, the ones based on how they're welded, run the other direction. And you have to decide whether you want the long bars running on the outside uninterrupted or the short bars running on the outside uninterrupted. We want the short bars on the inside of the arch when we are done. So that's the way we're going to set it up. The other thing you have to be aware of is that on a lot of cattle panels, the end squares are a different size on one side than they are on the other. So if you look at these squares here on the top, they're about the length of my finger. If we go down, you can see that that one is significantly longer than my finger. And that goes all the way down, and the ones at the bottom are the long squares, and the ones on the top are the short rectangles. So you have to be aware of whether you want that to be back or front. And that's how you're going to orient your panel based on whether or not you want the short bars inside or outside and where you want those smaller squares to end up. There are other sizes of panels available. The main difference between them is the thickness or gauge of the metal bars and the spacing of the holes. So your best bet is to check Tractor Supply or whatever your local farm and feed supply store happens to carry, and just pick based on what you can afford and what you want. Keep in mind, the stronger or heavier the gauge of metal, the more weight the panel will be able to take. So here's our first panel. This is actually going to be two panels for this arch, one in the front and one in the back to make just a longer archway. And what we've done is used one ratchet strap in the middle of the arch to kind of hold it in place while we get the rest of the structure set up. And the ratchet straps are really the best method we've found for when you're not 100% sure what size your arch needs to be, and you want to be able to test a few different variations without having to pound a stake in the ground to hold the arch in place, deciding you want it narrower or wider and having to pull the stake out and stake it in again. We've just found that the straps work really well for this. They let you make very good adjustments very quickly, and they keep just enough structure in the panel to stop it from flopping around or to stop one end from springing away and smacking somebody, which is a risk with these metal panels until you get them set up and tied down. So now we're going to show you how we attach the bottom straps, and these are the ones that you're going to be doing the most work with, and they're the most important because that's where most of the spring tension ends up. So it may be hard to see in the camera, but you should be able to see each of those little cross sections where the bars are welded together and where they meet. And you don't want to use the ones on the very end or on the very outside, because then your latch may move around. Whereas if you put it at one of the intersections, preferably right on the top, one square in, and then on the other side you pull it over and do exactly the same thing. The only other caveat here is try to make it so that the hooks are facing the bottom. That way, if for any reason tension is let off of the strap, the hooks will stay attached. If they're the other way around, they may fall off if you lose tension when you're moving the thing around. Then we do exactly the same thing with the bottom one. And that way you can just pull the strap over and hook it. And now you've got 3 straps holding the whole panel up and kind of keeping it in place. You may look at that and think, why don't I just use the 2 on the bottom? If you only use the bottom straps, then what happens is the middle can bow outwards and the top can collapse and the bottom will come in. So therefore you lose your structure and somebody can get a little hurt if they get smacked in the face with a panel. I found that with 3 straps, or even 4 if it's easier for you, that it just makes it keep its shape a whole lot better. So now we can go about arranging it, putting it where we want, and then we can measure how wide it is. We think that we want this panel at 5 foot. So Daisy has just taken the tape measure and measured from one bar to the other, all the way across exactly where the ratchet straps are, and that's at 5 foot. And we've just shortened each of the ratchet straps so that they're all the same length. So now we can test out what it looks like at 5 foot wide. So here Daisy's holding the cattle panel up. After we've positioned it, we've set it for the 5 feet that we think, but you can see she can hold it easily on one side without any problems. It doesn't flop around, it's not going to go anywhere because of the ratchet straps, but be aware that it is not completely structurally sound. If she lets go, it can fall over. So you just need one person to hold it in place. But other than that, it will stop it from springing back. You don't have to worry about it moving one side and not the other. It just needs a little bit of help. It just makes it a whole lot easier to manage if you have the ratchet straps on it. So Daisy and I have both stepped back and took a look at this where it is. This is at 5 foot. We're not sure, but we might want to run it to 5.5 foot so that that top is not quite as high. And we want to see what that looks like, so that's where we're just going to stretch out each of the straps in place without unhooking them. We're just going to stretch them out an extra 6 inches and see what that looks like, and we'll see whether we want to keep it at 5 foot or go to 5.5 foot. So this is the arch at 5.5 feet, and that actually lowers the top to about 78 inches. At 5 feet, it was about 80 inches, and I think we actually prefer it at 5 feet. So we're going to reset it again at 5 foot, and that should be our final adjustment. So here we've sped up the process. I'm just using longer T-posts in order to line up everything and use those as a reference for where I want the final T-post to go in and where we want the second panel to go. And then I check the first T-post where I would like it. And then we're going to dig out our mulch out of the way so that it's easier to get the T-post in the ground. Then I use the T-post driver to knock the T-post in and get it started. You can see that Daisy is pulling the panel away from the T-post, just because if I hit one of those pieces of metal of the panel with the T-post, it will dent it, and I don't want to do that. We're also checking to make sure that all of the T-posts are set to the same level. If you look on the flat side of the T-post that is against the panel, there will be knobs that are used to set different panels at different heights. You can simply make sure that all of those knobs are essentially at the same height against the bars of the T-post. And you'll see that when we're putting the clips on, where we've set ours against the bars that are there. And then once we get all of the posts in the right places, we'll go ahead and remove all of the straps and we'll be able to see how it's lined up. This is the finished result. We added a second panel behind the first using the exact same method, although we didn't have to measure as much as the first one. We used 3 clips for each post at the top, middle, and bottom. The result is seen when looking at the arch from the front. The side portions are quite straight, and the top is a nice even arch. You can tie down the arch in only 1 or 2 spots per pole if you want, but I don't think it would keep its shape quite as well when weighted down with vegetation and fruit. You can also use only 1 pole per panel if that's all you can manage. But we try to build with hurricanes and weather in mind, so we decided that 2 poles per arch would be better for us. Also, if you're propping the arch against something, like a raised bed edge, we prefer to attach the panel directly to the bed. In order for a panel to maintain its rigidity, it needs to be attached to an unmoving support, not just propped up against it. You don't have to do this the way that we have. We're just trying to show you some options and what works for us based on the previous ones we've made. After getting the 2 panels in place and clipped in, I used galvanized wire to keep the 2 panels together. We like galvanized electrical fence wire, which is light enough to be able to shape fairly easily with pliers, but strong enough to still be effective at supporting whatever we use it for. I just wrap the wire around the intersections a couple of times to keep the panels together. I tuck the cut ends into the center of the joint to stop people or plants from getting snagged on them. We've mentioned the clips a couple of times in this video. I'll just be showing the process of using the fence clips correctly and installing them on the T-posts as easily and securely as we know how. Let's take a look at those clips. To install the clips, which is probably the most secure way of doing this, you set up your T's so that the flat side with the notches is against the panel. You push the panel back into the T-post, and you'll see that the clips that come with the T-posts have a short hook on one side and a long loopy hook on the other side. This is the hook. This is called a horn. You take the hook and loop it around the panel wire, pull the panel towards the T. The first couple will be tight, and then you take the horn and place it down on the panel. You then take a screwdriver through the back and through the hole in the horn, and you twist the horn around the panel. And that is now secure. And that's how you secure a T-post clip. If you made it through all of that, thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks for taking the time. Maybe you're not going to build the arch that we have, but hopefully you got something out of this. If you don't mind, a like and a subscribe helps out new channels a lot. We'd appreciate it. Thanks again. We'll see you next time. Five foot wide. We're going to go with 4.5 foot wide and see what that does. We're not going to go with 4.5 foot, are we? We're going to go with 5.5 foot.
No, we're going to go with 5 foot.